I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being.
Hello there, my PhD supervisor. I used to think of you as a colleague. Then for a while, I thought of you as a friend. Now you're just my PhD supervisor.
Yeah, well, let's hope that doesn't grow into enemies. But I think you are getting very close now, and you're doing an exceptional job of it. So
it's a temporary state of affairs. One day you won't be. One day you'll be my former PhD supervisor,
and that will be a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
What shape are you?
Oh, what shape am I?
Yeah.
Wow, that was actually what someone I heard a joke about to this effect the other day. Someone said that I'm not in shape, and I said, yes, I am. Round is a shape. So I don't know. I'd say, well, my mind is going. I'm going to the sciencey sort of, whole somatotyping thing. Like mesomorph, ectomorph.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's where you're okay.
I used to be a meso-ectomorph, which is not too bad. I think my endomorph score has crept up a little bit, but I'm trying to manage that. I don't know, what shape am I? I'm a bit fluid. I can change shapes. I'm a shapeshifter.
Oh, you're a shapeshifter. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Let's we're going to be talking about a particular shape shortly, and I won't tell you what that shape is just yet. But I will say that the origin of this idea is more than, it's probably about 40 years old now, and it's often attributed to a particular person, a gentleman named David Guest, who wrote a piece in the Independent about 35 years ago. But prior to that, the concept was also popularised by the then CEO of IDEO, which you might know of, the Design Thinking Corporation. And the idea's been used in consulting circles and so on. And the shape I'm talking about is T-shaped, being T-shaped. Yeah. We talk about people and professionals as being T-shaped, and the idea of T-shape is that you have an area of depth, a particular or specific area about which you know a great deal, and some other related areas about which you know much less, but which intersect with that area that you know a great deal about as well. And it's sort of the thinking emerged, all those years ago, 35, 40 years ago, essentially as a critique of hyper specialisation. The idea that experts and expertise had become so siloed that the possibility of correspondence between professionals was really minimised. Now there is a bit of a we've been talking about PhDs, and there's an old joke about writing a PhD, which means that the course of that study means that you end up knowing more and more about less and less.
Until you know everything about nothing.
About nothing, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's probably that idea of hyper specialisation that the T-shaped thinking came about to challenge. Now, can I say, as someone who's in the process of writing a PhD, I don't actually think that's true. And in fact, in many ways, I think a good PhD is actually T-shaped. There's a great deal of depth about one particular area, and there's a demonstrated intersection with a number of other related areas. And in fact, I remember as an undergraduate student, one of my psychology lecturers giving me some advice which I've always held on to, and that advice is that when you write academically, a person of equivalent education outside of your discipline should be able to read, understand, and learn what you're writing about. In other words, your writing should be in a style that conveys that understanding to someone of a similar level of education. So that was always I sort of took that to heart, and it remained with me as really useful advice. So we've got this idea of the T-shaped professional, the person who has a specialty, that's the vertical bar of the T, and an ability to engage across several domains. And there's all sorts of jokes. There's the I-shaped professional, a bit like what we've been talking about, the person who knows everything about one thing, but they can't collaborate or work with anyone. The academic variation of that. The dash, the dash, or the M-dash shaped professional, all breadth and no depth. The person who's essentially confidently wrong about everything, which is the classic Dunning-Kruger effect, of course. Yeah. But being T-shaped professionally, I think, has a lot of advantages. One of those advantages, of course, is that you understand. You've got an area of focus or an area of study about which you understand and know a great deal. But also, because of that intersection, there's the possibility for the generation of new ideas, and new ideas that emerge from that intersection, where ideas moving in this direction kind of collide with ideas moving in that direction. And in fact, being T-shaped in lifestyle medicine, I think, is a terrific advantage, and possibly even exactly what we should be aiming for. And I might even go as far as to say that, and I'm the archetypal, not a doctor, but in my view, lifestyle medicine is probably the most T-shaped specialty in healthcare, because you do need significant depth in a particular area, and for example, my particular area is behavioural change and social connection and so on. And you also need that kind of fluency, if you like, across all the intersecting areas: nutrition, exercise, activity, sleep, and so on. And another person's T-shape is going to be different, of course. They'll have a different depth, and some other intersections.
Yeah, as you described, so I'm still wrestling this idea of what shape I am, and I'm still stuck on the first question here. But you know what? And I think
everyone else has finished the exam.
Yeah, I know. I'm still there tapping my pen. I think I've changed shape, to be honest, and I think this is confession of how Darren's brain works. But when I was younger, and very interested in sort of getting established in a field, I think I was an I reckon. I actually, and even to the point, like I just want to take a deep dive into that particular area, become expert in that particular thin slither of the pie. And so much so, I remember, I distinctly remember thinking about this. I was watching my brother-in-law went on one of these game shows, the general knowledge, like a Sale of the Century or.
Yeah.
It was one of these things where you have to know just stuff about a whole breadth of things. In fact, In fact, we had a guy at the Surf Lifesaving Club that I used to patrol at, and he was a tradie, right? So it's not like he's a tradesman. He didn't work in any particular academic area, but he won. He actually won, like, I think it was over $1 million in one of these. He went right through the rounds. And the reason for it, he had this incredible general knowledge. Like, it was so flat. He just knew these random facts. And I remember even when we were on patrol, he would just be spitting out these bits of information. I just completely eclectic, just all over. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not using my brain capacity on that kind of stuff. Like, I know that the scope up here is pretty limited. All right, I'm working with a finite capacity here, and so I was actually I wouldn't read that broadly. I actually was very focused on, this is my area. I want to nail that down and know everything about that and take a really deep dive.
And when did that start to shift for you? And why?
I think probably by about the age of 30. I started to then, I took a lot more interest in, it was actually my interest in well-being, to be honest, and whole person well-being, because my exercise was my area. So I actually took a very deep dive into exercise. I've written books on exercise. I did my PhD in exercise physiology. Love that.
And it's worth noting for listeners who may not know. It's worth noting for them that at this point in time, you are still considered the foremost world expert on the stitch,
the runner's stitch. Pain in your side.
Yeah.
It's super narrow, and hardly anyone else is researching it.
So we can invite our listeners to do this experiment for themselves if they want. Go to your favourite search engine and type in the question, "Who is the world expert on the runner's stitch?" Sit back and be amazed.
and be amazed. That's right. It's so amazing. But I think what happened for me, I started to get, and I'm talking very much from a lifestyle medicine sort of wellbeing perspective. I started to realise that wasn't all there was to this whole person health. There were these other determinants as well, and so I think I allowed my mind to start to migrate and go broader. And in some of those, I think, I don't know what my shape is then, because I think I definitely have this very deep dive into exercise, very but then it's sort of a spread. And then every now and then I take another sort of, not as deep.
Interesting.
We've got these other little stelly types hanging off the wall, if you like. So, and I think I know that within our, like even at our university, within academia, there's always this talk about sort of, cross-disciplinary research, and I see huge value in that. In fact, within lifestyle medicine, I took a very, probably 15 years ago, so maybe when I was 40, I took a real interest in holistic mental well-being, and what I could see is that lifestyle medicine had a lot to contribute to that. Positive psychology had a lot to contribute to that. Neuroscience. So I found myself becoming a lot more of a generalist. And not taking, and when you're spreading yourself thin, you can't take the same sort of depth of dive into all the areas. But that's what the Lift project grew out of. Essentially, was this.
Yeah, interesting. So you're still anchored by exercise. That exercise is your vertical bar. And can I say, for someone who knows so much about the runner's stitch, you are extraordinarily humble.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
But that exercise is your vertical bar, and there's a bunch of other things, and you've also observed that at different times, perhaps you've approached pie shaped, as in the Greek letter pi.
Yes.
With the two vertical bars and the cross. And if you keep doing, you also said earlier, I think my shape has changed over time, and I suspect this is a desirable thing, because what that suggests is that as we continue to learn and read and grow, our interest extends into other areas. So we do, in fact, start growing more stalactites, down from that general knowledge, and over time, perhaps we end up with still that single long bar that's always been the anchor, but with an increasing number of stalactites growing down from this kind of horizontal bar, which I think is probably a really desirable way to be, because it, at some level, it reflects internal interest and curiosity. It reflects something about the character of the person. In order to develop in that shape, of course, you have to have a desire to develop in that shape. You have to want to pursue those areas of knowledge. They don't just happen to you. So we learn something about the character of the person, and arguably that person then becomes more adept across a number of different fields.
Has your shape changed?
Yeah, my shape. Yes, absolutely. My shape has changed, and probably in the way that we're talking about right now. So I feel like there are a number of stalactites for me that are, just progressively beginning to emerge from, that horizontal bar, and some of them I pursue harder than others. Some of them, and at different times, I deepen some and not others. But that sort of foundation of, or that foundational pillar of, if you like, the principles of behavioural change and understanding human behavioural change, that's still the thing for me. That's the anchoring point. Yeah. I'm sure I've shared this story with you several years ago, 6 years ago now. I had a spontaneous retinal detachment in my left eye. I wasn't doing anything stupid like bungee jumping, or it just happened. And I was very fortunate. I was close by the major eye hospital in Sydney. I went there, ended up with a absolutely superb surgeon who was also turned out to be just about the most delightful human being you could want to encounter. He did my eye surgery, was very successful. 6 months later, the same thing happened in my other eye. So he did that surgery again with the same great outcome. He was, at the time he was doing my surgery, he had just turned 40. So he was sort of 40, 41. He'd only been in practice as a medical professional, like independent practice, for about 10 years, because all that time he'd been to medical school and then his specialty and his fellowship and so on. So years and years and years of this kind of training before he was working independently. But he did say to me at one stage, I know more than anyone else in the country about a piece of tissue that's this big, but I don't really know much about anything else. And at one stage he quipped that even though he's a doctor, if you have a heart attack, he's not the person that you want to you want to be nearby.
Yeah.
So in some contexts, that extraordinarily deep degree of specialty is incredibly valuable, and in most of life, it's actually not necessary. Most of retinal attachments, thankfully, are they're comparatively uncommon. And while it's wonderful to have people, like my surgeon who has that depth of knowledge, We don't all need to be like that, and being T-shaped is much more significant. But there's another part. You asked me, had my shape changed over time? And there's another part to that question which is really interesting, and that is, which part of that shape do I mostly work in? So if you imagine a T shape or an I shape or whatever other shape, pie shape, that represents what we know about. But where do we work, and what do we focus on? And I find the most satisfying work that I do is actually at those intersection points. It's where one piece of knowledge or one domain of knowledge collides with another. That's where I feel deeply professionally satisfied, and being able to have the opportunity to really think about what happens when we bring these things together. What is the product of these things? What does it look like if we merge this and that? And again, that brings us straight back to lifestyle medicine, of course, and the practice of lifestyle medicine, which in fact is all about that. What happens when we merge nutrition and activity and exercise? What happens when we merge those with attention to sleep? What happens when we merge sleep with social connection, and so on and so on?
Yeah, a couple of thought and reflections there. One is, I agree with you that there's huge stimulation when in that intersection point. And I find this within academia, like sometimes I have the good fortune to be able to connect with other experts. So they have their T's as well, but their anchors are in different domains. And the dialogue, when you can actually, you're sharing your deep dive learnings and they're sharing theirs, and the synergy of all that when it comes together, it's very, very stimulating. So I love it. But I also think as you've been speaking, I've been thinking about sometimes the deep dives, I actually get that they get a bit tedious, to be honest. And I think particularly of nutrition research in this regard, I sometimes, I think my brain's become a bit more, as you get broader, it becomes bigger, sort of bigger picture, I think, as compared to deep dive, sort of smaller picture. And I love to be in this bigger space, I think, now. But this is one of my criticisms of nutrition research often, is that they're not content to know why a blueberry is good for you, as an example. It's wanting to get to the nitty gritty of what particular compound and in blueberries is doing this particular thing, and I think that you can actually, if you go too deep, it's almost like you can get stuck down there, like it's and sort of you lose that sort of that dissemination piece, that ability for
it becomes the classic. You can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's right.
You've got your focus only on the trees, and you miss the idea that there's a forest here. Yeah.
So maybe that whole T shape is a good analogy in that. Okay, we can have the anchors down here, but it's really important that we be operating up here, where you're actually seeing the big picture and how it all comes together. And we need these researchers doing this great work. I mean, there's amazing things that are being done down in the depths there, but it needs to filter up and actually then be assimilated and reorganized in order for it to be productive and useful for everyone.
One of the nice ideas about being T-shaped, and this was actually articulated by Tim Brown from IDEO, is the idea that a T-shaped person is expert enough to contribute and curious enough to learn.
It's great.
So for me, that's a really nice kind of nice explanation of this. And historically, there's been some significant outcomes of this. For example, I'm sure you know about the process of pasteurization of milk in order to remove antigens from it. Louis Pasteur was not a physician; he was a chemist. And for that very reason, he was able to see things that physicians of the time weren't able to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the time, we would have, because there was sickness associated with it, we would have been more and more and more looking to physicians to say, answer this, answer this, answer this.
Yes.
And the deeper and deeper they went, the further away they got from the solution.
That's really insightful. And you think of the longevity centre. Who was the gentleman who basically pioneered lifestyle medicine? This is terrible. His name's escaped my mind. But this is back in the 50s, the one who had the heart attack or had heart disease.
Nathan Pritikin.
Nathan Pritikin, of course. Now, Nathan Pritikin, he wasn't a physician.
Exactly right. Yeah.
He championed lifestyle medicine. He was the one that pushed back on the medical community and said, I don't think the idea of after you've had a heart episode, lying in bed for 6 months and not using your heart is a good idea. And I do think that the foods we're eating, they're assimilating into us, and I think they could be part of the problem here, and hence part of the solution if we eat in the right way. So he was an inventor, and he apparently had many different patents, not just in the lifestyle medicine space to his name. So another great example of someone, because they're not down in the depths, they can actually see this thing, for what it is and come up with innovative ways of doing it.
Yeah. And there are, it's important also to be realistic about some of there are disadvantages to this as well. I mean, we're talking about the advantages of sort of that combination of credibility and humility and being able to collaborate more and being curious about what happens at the intersection of these areas of knowledge and also, look, I guess you might say that from a career perspective, you're probably a little bit resilient if you're T-shaped, because you've started, getting some roots out into other areas. But there can be disadvantages to this as well. The first is that being T-shaped is a deliberate practice. I mean, it doesn't happen accidentally. You've really got to invest time and energy and effort into becoming super expert at something, like the runner's stitch, and simultaneously being able to broach all these other areas as well. I think there is a risk in people if people are not self-reflective. If people don't engage in the process of self-reflection, there's a risk that horizontal bar becomes kind of undisciplined and that someone may even convince themselves that they know much more about something than they do. In other words, the Dunning-Kruger effect that we mentioned before. That horizontal bar turns out to be kind of dangerously thin if we don't attend to it. And if we don't engage in the process of self-reflection, then we don't have an opportunity to correct that. So, it's not a natural state. I think there are distinct advantages to being T-shaped professionally, and there are some disadvantages that we need to be careful of as well.
I like that, and you know what?
Yeah.
I think that there is a place for eye shape. Like, for example, when you go to your ophthalmologist and do eye surgery, and he says, "Hey, I can only help you with your eyes. If it's your heart, then sorry, you need to see someone else." That's okay. Now, I'm just here for my eyes.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I think, in terms of being a rounded, person, I think the idea of being intentional about, this might be my expert area, but let's be curious enough to look beyond that, to have that breadth and depth. I think
so. I noticed then that you just tried to hijack my T-shaped analogy back into the rounded person, which I'm interpreting as an effort to justify your own shape again.
That's exactly right.
But
round is a shape.
So the other interesting thing, of course, is think about the kind of classic dinner party, the dinner party setting, who is the most excruciating dinner guest to sit next to? They're the person who knows absolutely everything about just this one domain and won't talk about anything else. And every part of the conversation ends up being twisted back into this one thing that they know a great deal about. So being eye-shaped has advantages, and it also has disadvantages as well. And I appreciate that there's an intersection with personality here as well, in how we express that. But in general, I think lifestyle medicine structurally lends itself to practitioners who are interested in becoming T-shaped professionals, because we can develop a particular area of very deep expertise and connect that thoughtfully and methodically to other areas that intersect really strongly with that, and it really is it really is the intersection, I think, of knowledge and curiosity, or knowledge and humility, a recognition that these things are here, and I know a little bit about them, and I want to keep learning about these. I want to learn some more about these.
And I think that, I see the people that come into the lifestyle medicine space, I think that fairly accurately describes them. Normally they're an expert in one particular area, whether it be, nutrition or exercise or psychology or behavior change or whatever it might be, but they realise the necessity to not just, be siloed, but actually spread the wings and actually have that sort of integration of all these other areas. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that lifestyle medicine really is a call to be T-shaped. So I'm spreading my wings, brother, and I'll let you know how I'm doing.
Wonderful. And just be sure never to be Q-shaped. Q-shaped means you're just going round and round in circles, and then you just kind of peter out at the end.
Promise I won't peter out.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.